everyone. My name is Andre Felix. I'm the communication coordinator at European Disability Forum, and I want to welcome you to our event on the European Disability Card, From Proposal to Reality. Before I start presenting the event, I just would like to give you some housekeeping guidelines to make sure that the event goes well, since we are a lot of people and we are really pleased with this high participation. So this event is accessible. We have to make sure that interpreters and captioners can do their job well. We would ask you to remain muted with camera off. We have real-time captioning in English. You can activate it in the Zoom button or use the external link that is provided in the chat box. If you use the external link, you will also see that there is automatic translation into German, French, Italian, and Spanish. We added these languages upon request of the participants. In addition, we have international sign interpretation. We have now around 100 participants. So in terms of the interactive part of event, we will use mainly the text box almost exclusively. So for questions and answers, I would ask you to use the question and answer box that appears on Zoom. This is the one that we will check for questions regarding content. The chat box, we ask you to keep it for technical questions only. So if you have a technical issue, my colleague Raquel, thank you very much, Raquel, will help you solve it. But we ask you really to refrain from commenting or adding off-topic text there. Otherwise, it will make it very difficult. I will repeat it at the end, but as in all our events, we have a post-event survey to improve them in the future. So when we close the meeting, please just take a few minutes. It will appear in your browser and take a few minutes just to fill it, please. So thank you very much. Now passing for this webinar. The title of this webinar is the European Disability Card, From Proposal to Reality. We are hosting this webinar for a wide audience because we at the European Disability Forum are leading on this file in terms of the concerns of persons with disabilities. And we do notice and we really appreciate the big interest, the important interest, both from persons with disabilities, but also from the general public on the card. It will be an important instrument. It will be an important card for persons with disabilities, but we need to ensure that it is well implemented. It is called From Proposal from Reality because unlike some people asked us, many people have asked if the card already exists. It doesn't exist already. The proposal means that there is a project for a law that now needs to go into discussions before it is a reality. So it is the right moment. It is the right moment to know more about this card, how it can help us in the future, but also how we can pressure political representatives to make sure the card is the best card possible. So just a few notes regarding the agenda. We will start with a keynote video by the member of the European Parliament, Lucia Dodis Nikolsonova. MEP Nikolsonova is the key person in the Parliament that is dealing with this file and preparing the Parliament's position. Then you will have to listen to me again. I will present the proposal, so what the card should be, a bit of the history, and the steps until it's adopted, so you know what there is still in the journey ahead. Then I'll pass to my colleague, our Deputy Director, Alejandro Moledo, for the position of the forum, and then we'll have some space for questions and answers. So without further ado, I will share MEP Nikolsonova's video.
Hello, greetings from Brussels, dear participants of the European Disability Forum event. Congratulations to you. We have European Disability Card on the table, and it is because of you and because you never gave up in this fight. And for 15 years, you've been fighting for this piece of legislation to come. And it's finally here. And I'm the rapporteur on European Disability Card, and I'm very, very honored by this. And we met already with the European Disability Forum. We are cooperating on this legislation since the very first moment the European Commission released it, and this will remain so until the very end. And I very much hope that we will be able to close this within this mandate, so very, very soon, for all the persons with disabilities within European Union.
So as we heard from MEP Nikolsonova, we have an ambitious timeline from the negotiators, from the policymakers and decision makers to have this card ready. This is why it is important also to come together as the disability movement and as allies of the disability movement to make this card the best card possible. And how do we do that? So this is to know how to advocate for the future. We want to present you a bit of the history of the card, but also what is on the table. The first step was indeed that the European Commission presented a proposal. This is what a proposal is, just that. It's just a proposal that is now being discussed by other policymakers, the European Parliament and the European Commission. But before the proposal, there were already pilot projects and demands since many years ago. In this presentation, I will start by explaining a bit the origins and the pilot projects that existed. Then I will very quickly present what the Commission wants for the card, let's say. And then importantly, I will present both next steps and the key players, let's say the key decision makers that we should pressure to make sure or that we can pressure to make sure the card is as strong as possible. So the card has been in the works for many years. It started to be a concrete demand of the disability movement and of the Forum and its members in 2011. And it was related with what we call the freedom of the movement of the European Union, so that every European citizen should be able to have access to the same goods and services, independent on which country they are in the European Union. And this should be the same for disability-related rights and discounts. So if someone a Spanish person living in Portugal, for example, with a disability should have access to the same rights, to the same preferential access, discounts, and allowances that exist in Portugal. These demands did not lead to a law immediately, as we know, since we are in 2023, but they led to pilot projects. So the European Commission launched some pilot projects to see how the card would look like. This pilot project started in 2015, but in their purview, in their scope and funding, they were limited. And the card would only work between the 8 countries that participated. These 8 countries, so if you are a Belgian person with European disability card and you move and you visited France, for example, you would in principle not be able to use the card. Only if you went to Italy or Malta, then you would be able. But in a very limited set of services. So it only gave preferential access to culture, leisure, and sport. And on top of it, it was voluntary. So not all service providers, not all museums that give discounts to persons with disabilities needed to accept the card. This is something that House of Service Providers told us they would have to apply and to prepare some bureaucratic documents. This pilot project was, as I said, in 8 countries. and it was implemented differently with different aspects in the countries. The countries were Belgium, Cyprus, Estonia, Finland, Italy, Malta, Romania, and Slovenia. Based on the implementation of the card and on the impact the card had on persons and the feedback they received both from the national governments, but also from associations and persons with disabilities in this country, the European Commission concluded that the pilot projects were successful in showing that the card should exist everywhere in the European Union, and therefore they proposed in 2023 legislation. The legislation was a directive for a European disability card, but also for an European parking card for persons with disabilities. So concretely, when this legislation is implemented, there will be two cards, the European Disability Card and the European Parking Card. So what is the European Disability Card? The European Disability Card that is proposed by the European Commission will be both a physical and digital card. So both versions would be possible if the text is approved, as it is, but it only gives access to preferential discounts and services during short stays, which means that for services and discounts that require someone to be a resident, just using the European Disability Card will not be allowed. What is difference from the pilot project is that it does not limit there is not a limit to a certain kind of services or certain areas like culture and leisure. It is based on mutual recognition of disability status to access services and discounts, including transport discounts and services in all EU countries. With a big exception, the card will not allow people to access social protection and social security allowance. So this is something that my colleague Alejandro will speak more later. The card will be available to European Union citizens. So if you are a citizen from the European Union and you visit another country, but also, and this is a welcome addition, to persons that are not citizens, that are not nationals from the European Union, but are residents. So there is an additional legislation that my colleague can also explain that will extend indeed this protection to a person that is not a national, but has residency status in the European Union. In terms of a more technical details, the card takes form, the legislation will take form of a directive. This is one of the many types of laws that the European Union has at its disposal to create policy. A directive means that the law will not be directly implemented all the same in all EU countries. It means that when it's decided and approved and published, then European Union countries will have to adapt to create their own national laws to ensure the card exists in their country. And they will be the responsible to enforce the law and the existence of the card in this case. It also doesn't mean that when the European Disability Card Directive is approved, the card will finally exist. The countries will have 18 months from the date the law enters into force to adapt and start delivering the card. This means that in reality, it's very unlikely that the card will exist in 2024. We expect at least 2 to 3 years or even more until the card is a reality and people can use it all throughout the Union. For the European parking card, in addition to these details, it is a bit different, obviously, from accessing all goods and services. It is a card to access preferential parking conditions in all the EU countries. So the card will be the same card across the Union. So it will replace national cards, something that the European Disability Card, is important to note, will not do, or we hope it will not do. We need to see the final text. This one will replace the proposed replacement of national cards, and it should be recognized everywhere within the European Union. However, it's important to note that while there will be the same parking card, the parking space and rules around it, so what are parking spaces reserved for persons with disabilities from when to when, they will remain different. They will remain a competence of the national governments. So with a bit of this in mind, I hope you have an idea of what these cards will give, but now we are starting still our journey. So, and our journey means that the law still needs to be discussed and the final text needs to be approved. What I told you now, it's the proposal that is in place, but it can be changed and amended, and the final text might be very different. And who is responsible for amending and changing this text? There are two main key players, as I like to call them, so two legislators. One is the European Parliament, and the other is the European Council, the Council of the European Union. The European Parliament is composed by members of the European Parliament that are elected by EU citizens. The Council of the European Union brings together national governments and the heads of state of these national governments. So it is, if we want to very simplify, it's composed by ministers of all the member states. And they now need to work together and separately and then together, better said, to create the final legislation. The first phase, let's call it the first phase, means that both bodies, both European Parliament and the Council, are working separately. They are both analyzing the text and creating their propositions. In the European Parliament, this means that, and this is the step there is a decision on lead negotiator, which we saw was MEP Nikolsonova, and a decision on watch committees, which are small configurations where MEPs can really go deeply into a bit more thematic areas that they have more competence. So these committees, these bodies are discussing the report. As soon as the report is approved by these bodies, it's submitted to all the MEPs. So here we are in phase 4, approval of the report, and then a submission to all MEPs who vote on the report. And the report of the European Parliament is basically the negotiating position of the European Parliament, their text that they will try to defend. The European Council also will result in the same thing, on having their own text with a bit more simplified steps. So first is decision on which set of ministers is responsible for this. This is already decided. Then there are several meetings to discuss their position, to bring them together, and it will be voted by the ministers. At this step, which we don't have actual dates yet for when it is, the text joined together and the lead negotiators of both the European Parliament and Council, assisted by the European Commission, get together to try to get these three texts that they have, the proposal and their positions, into one final text. When the text is agreed, in the second step, the Council will vote on the final text and the Parliament will also vote on the final text. Once both approve the final text, then it is a bit the end of their journey. The text is published in the official journal of the EU. So the official journal is a list of all the laws that exist in the European Union. And from then, the European countries will have a set time to translate and implement the law in their countries. So it is a long journey with a lot of steps, but it is important to know how we can influence it. As you heard from MEP Nikolsonova in the video, their aim is indeed to try to have it approved by the European elections, so that we get the publication in the official journal. But the reality, nobody knows. And who are the key players? So I talked about the Parliament. Inside the Parliament, I talked about committees. The main committee in charge of this file is what is called the European Employment and Social Affairs Committee, where MEP Nikolsonova is a member. And a committee that is also very important is the Transport Committee, that can also propose amendments to the text and will have a deep involvement in making sure that the position of the European Parliament. But besides these two committees, because it's such an important and interesting, and I have to say popular file, there are 3 other committees that decided to join to give opinions. So the Internal Market Committee, the Women's Rights Committee, also called in EU jargon the FEM Committee, and the Petitions Committee. So they will all do some opinions that should be taken into account by the negotiator. As I said, the main negotiator and maybe really the key player in the European Parliament will be MEP Nicole Sonova, which is in very good contact with us. But on top of, with MEP Nicole Sonova, most of the political groups inside the Parliament also appoint a supporting negotiator, what we call a shadow rapporteur, to make sure their political position is taken into account. These are, you'll have the PowerPoint after the meeting if you don't have it already. So you will see that you can have their official contact details there. From the parties, from the other parties, the rapporteurs, the shadow rapporteurs are David Casa from the European People's Party and from Malta, Katrin Langen-Zippen representing the Greens from Germany, João Albuquerque representing the Socialists and Democrats from Portugal, and José Guzmão representing the left, GUE, NGL, the correct name, that is also coming from Portugal. It is important to note that 2 of these members of the Parliament are also part of the disability intergroup in the European Parliament. So they are quite involved with disability rights. And these are Katrin Langen-Zippen and José Guzmão, who both share the intergroup, I'm sorry. From the Conservatives and Reformists, there is Elżbieta Rafalska from Poland, and from the Identity and Democracy Group, there is Elena Lisi from Italy. And then the negotiators from other committees that are also important to know because they will be very involved in this file. In terms of transport, in terms of questions related to transport, is MEP Erik Bergqvist from Socialist Democrats in Sweden. And in terms of Women's Rights Committee is MEP Rosa Esteras Ferragut from the European People's Party and from Spain. From the European Council, now that you have all these names in mind, please you'll receive the PowerPoint, so don't feel free to not keep them in mind so too long. European Council is a bit more simple at some point, but also complicated because they do not have a spearhead for each file. Who leads the negotiations is the presidency of the council. So this is a rotating 6-month presidency that each 6 months is led by a different country. Until the end of this year, Spain will lead the president, and from first semester 2024 will be Belgium. They are both very strong advocates for the card, so we have good hopes here. And this is a bit the end of my presentation. So I hope you have more or less an idea of what's happening with the card, and I'm passing to our Deputy Director Alejandro Moledo to speak also about our position now and about what we think are the strengths and what needs to be improved in the current proposal.
Many thanks, André. So yeah, my name is Alejandro Moledo, and I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Policy at the European Disability Forum. Next slide, please, André. And I would like to show you which are the strengths and which are the weaknesses that we found in the European Commission's proposal. Firstly, as André has already mentioned, we were very glad to see that the proposal takes the form of a directive, which is a binding legislation, a European binding legislation. Is not the strongest type of legislation. There is the regulation, which is the, let's say, the most immediate legislation that will apply directly. In the case of directives, as André already said, countries will need to introduce or change national laws in order to be in line or to fulfill the objectives and the requirements of this legislation, but it's binding, which is great. It's not a project, it's not a recommendation, it's binding legislation. Then another point which in our view is we can say that the most important and the most welcome positive aspect of the proposal is that it's changed the logic from the previous pilot project, because in these pilot projects we had the possibility of mutual recognition for European Disability Card holders by service providers on a voluntary basis, let's say. So it was a very limited scope, as Andre already mentioned, focusing just on culture, leisure, sports, and tourism, and not much. And then the service providers, so a museum, a theater, a gym, could decide if they would recognize or would accept the disability card as a proof of disability. This is not the case with what we have now on the table. Now the logic has changed. And now with this legislation, we would be ensuring a mutual recognition of disability for all services, in all services. So regardless of the European country you are visiting, regardless of the service we are talking about, if that service is providing a preferential treatment or a special condition to a national with disabilities, a local person with disabilities, let's say, a European with disability who shows the European disability card should be treated equally. So this change in the logic of the disability card is precisely what the disability movement was calling for. Something that we welcome very much as well in this sense is that the services also include transport, which was not the case in the pilot project. Additionally, we very much welcome the fact that the disability card also, the legislation also recognizes the role of personal assistance in accompanying persons with disabilities. Additionally, the card, or as it is explained in the proposal, it respects privacy. So it will not say which type of disability you have, which kind of level of disability you have. So it's just recognizing a person with disability. And obviously, the national authorities of your home country will be the ones deciding the disability assessment and who gets the European disability card. So the proposal does not get into these competencies which are at national level. Another positive point is that the legislation, this directive, allows for the complementarity with national cards, because we know that in some countries, in some European countries, we have national disability cards. In others, you have a certificate there. In others, you don't have itself something to prove that you have a disability recognized. So the directive is presented in such a way that it could combine the national disability card and the European disability card. In some cases, even having it on the same card. So one side the national and one side the European. This may be the case that some countries may decide to go for this solution, for example. In others, you will still have your national disability card, and then you can request the European to travel, as we do, for example, in other domains such as health, for example. It was already mentioned by Andre that the card, the proposal allows for digital capabilities. So we will have a physical card, but there should be also the possibility, if the country decides so, to have a digital version of the European disability card. But it's important to say as well that the use of the European disability card when you travel abroad is voluntary. So you are not required to show this card, for example, to access other rights that we have under other European legislation. So, for example, assistance in an airport or in a station. You should not, and we will make sure of this in our advocacy, you are not required to show the European disability card to access those rights that we have under other legislation. And finally, as another positive point, because there were some rumors and questions about it, and for some, at some point we feared that the Commission was planning to merge the European disability card and the European parking card, and obviously this doesn't make sense, because you need to, in many cases, you need to leave the parking card in your car, and if you use your card to go to a museum, you cannot, leave the card in your car and then use it to have for example, a discount in this museum. So this didn't make sense, but for some time we feared that this could be the way forward, but thankfully both cards will remain different. And then moving to the weaknesses of the proposal, the main problem that we find, and it's important to recognize this, is that the European disability card, even though it's a very, very good proposal that we are welcoming very much, it will not solve the many barriers that we face when we try to enjoy our freedom of movement as EU citizens. When a person with disability moves to another European country to work or to study or to do an Erasmus, we face many barriers in terms of accessibility, in terms of the portability of certain social protection measures when we move. And the card, unfortunately, does not cover these aspects, and the proposal excludes totally any social protection from the scope of the Act. There is, in this sense, there is no link consequently with EU mobility programs such as Erasmus, the one we all know, or Solidarity Corps on volunteering programs as well. We also found as a bit of a weakness in the proposal that it leaves the responsibility of raising awareness about the card to just member states. So we thought that the EU should also, the EU institutions should also take a responsibility in raising awareness and coordinating a campaign to for the people to get to know about this card. And also we found that there was not too much of room for meaningful involvement of persons with disabilities and our representative organizations in the development of certain elements of the card, of the proposal. And finally, we did not see clearly in the legislation that the issuing of the disability card should be free of charge. So there may be some countries, and we have heard that this is already one of the hot topics being discussed in the Council. Certain countries are asking for the possibility to charge fees to receive the card, for example, to issue and receive the card. So let's move on to our proposals, and I will explain you how we plan and what are we proposing to the European policymakers, how to improve further the proposal, which, as I said, is already quite positive from the outset. So it makes our work I wouldn't say easier, because it's not easy at all to deal with certain policymakers, but certainly it is appreciated that it has a good starting point. So the first and most important point, as you can already imagine, relates to the scope of the disability card. So we very much welcome the fact that all services are included. those that are for profit and those that are, as you can say, for free. And we also applauded very much the fact that transport services are included, because that was a big flaw of the pilot project, and one of the key aspects that EDF and our members were calling for. So we want to be sure that this scope is retained in the final text. The Parliament, as you can imagine, is very much on our side, but certain member states are already raising concerns about whether transport should be in or not in the proposal. So we need to fight to make sure that transport and all services will be kept in the final text. The point in which we want to improve the proposal, and this is, I would say, the key demand of the disability movement, is precisely to tackle the problem that I mentioned before. So the problem of persons with disabilities when moving permanently to another member state in order to work, or in order to do Erasmus, or because you enroll in a university in another EU member state. And as EU citizens, we have the right to do so. But in practice, persons with disabilities, we face tremendous barriers because of the lack of the social protection when we do when we move permanently. So EDF and our members, we came up with a demand in which we can utilize, or we propose to utilize, the European Disability Card as a transitional measure when you move to work or to study. So the country that you move to permanently, and in which you need to go through the disability assessment again, while your disability is being reassessed by your new country of residence, the disability card should grant you the support you need in order to work or to study on equal footing with nationals with disabilities. This means that if you move from a country, from Spain, for example, as it was my case, to Belgium, the authorities of the new country of residence should provide you with reasonable accommodation of your workspace, or to access to adapted housing, or sign language interpretation, personal assistance. So this transitional measure, while your disability is being reassessed, should be granted with the European Disability Card. Furthermore, we want to ensure and we have done so in our proposals to the MEPs and member states, we want to ensure that the disability card is free of charge, so the countries can issue the disability card free of charge. And as I mentioned before, that is not required to access other rights that we achieved through other European legislation. Particularly here, we are thinking of assistance when traveling. Next slide, please. And concerning other proposals that we put forward regarding the parking card, since we all know that the parking conditions, the parking rules for using the European parking card are very different even from city to city. We thought that in the proposal, and we are proposing that the European Union creates a sort of a database in which public authorities can upload the conditions and the rules of their parking rules. So persons with disabilities should have an easy access to this information when traveling, because of course when you move with your car from city to city or from country to country, you don't necessarily know what rules apply there. So having this kind of portal in which you can access such information would be very, very useful, particularly if this information is provided in all EU languages. concerning the format of the parking card as well, something that we missed. And if you're curious, check out the annex of the proposal, because then you will see the format that the Commission envisaged for both the European Disability Card and the European Parking Card. You'll see the logos they came up with and so forth, and the colors and blah, blah. They included obviously certain accessibility requirements for the cards. And something that we found that it missed in the parking card was the use of Braille, which was included in the disability card. So we are proposing to add Braille there. And finally, concerning awareness raising and the campaigns that we want the EU to get involved as well, not to leave just this task to member states. We are proposing to have a public website with information on the conditions of the disability card, where to get it, and so forth. And even if the Commission already proposed certain obligations as for providing this information in an accessible manner, we are proposing improvements as well. So to provide the information in sign language or in easy to read, for example, and to ensure that the information is easy to understand. And lastly, sorry, because I see that I missed a point concerning other complementing acts that are related to the technicalities, let's say, of the card. So with the digital capabilities and so forth. These are other types of legislation that will be developed afterwards, mostly led by the European Commission, but in consultation with member states. We believe that in this supporting acts or complementary legal acts, persons with disabilities and the representative organizations should also be involved. So we are also proposing that the Commission meaningfully involves us in the development of these acts that will come afterwards once the disability card is adopted. Next slide. And here you can find, let's say, the most recent position papers of EDF. Since we knew that the card would be presented this year, last year we already organized a big gathering with all our members and with activists, and we discussed our position, which is the basis of our advocacy, obviously, even though, as Andre mentioned, we've been campaigning for the card for more than 15 years. Then once the Commission released the proposal, we analyzed it. So you can also check our first analysis, and we gave feedback to the Commission. But if you are planning to reach out to MEPs or to your government in charge of so your ministry in charge of disability, and you want to support our campaign, here you can find as well our proposals for amendments. So with a specific wording that they can introduce in the final text, and you can use it also to achieve this this improvement that I just presented. We have a dedicated website. If you're interested, we will post there all information about our campaign, and we will keep you posted on every step we take along this fascinating journey, as Andre put it as well. So I think that's all from my side. Andre, can you pass to the next slide? I think so. Yes, and even though I'm speaking about our position, our colleague Marie Denninghaus, Senior Policy Coordinator here at EDF, she's been campaigning for the disability card all these years, and she's the expert on this matter, on the parking card, on the disability card. She's with us today, but she's a bit sick, but she's listening, so I will try to answer any question, and if you have very difficult question, I may invoke Marie to answer as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Thank you so much, everyone. We are now taking a small 10-minute break, so we'll come back at 2:55, 10-minute break, to which we'll proceed just with a small summary of what we discussed now, and we will answer your questions. So my colleague Alejandro and Marie and me will answer your questions. So see you at 2:55. Thank you very much. I want first of all to thank everyone for the excellent questions that you put in the Q&A box. Before I go through them, I will just do a little summary of what we talked about in the first part. So we start with a welcome message by the lead negotiator of the European Parliament, MEP Nicole Sonova. And then I shared the origins of the card. Since 2011, there was a demand from the disability movement, which led to pilot projects in 8 countries, and that were then led to a proposal for 2 new cards, the European Disability Card and European Parking Card for persons with disabilities. We pass to briefly explain the disability card first, to note that the text is still under discussion, so the final text and the final law will maybe look different. But focusing on what we have now on the proposal, we explain that the disability card will focus on mutual recognition of disability status to assess services during short stays, but that it excludes indeed social services and allowances. Then we explain that EU countries will need to adapt the final law to their countries and implement the card. So it will take at least 2 or 3 years. We also mentioned, MEP Nicole Sonova mentioned that they aim to have the final text by the European elections, but this might not be the case. It's not a hard deadline. Then we talked about the parking card, which we noted that will replace national parking cards and will look the same across the Union, but the conditions for parking will remain at national level, so different countries might have different conditions. We then pass through the steps that politicians and decision makers need to still undergo until the law is approved, and presented the 2 main key decision maker bodies, so the European Parliament and the Council of the EU. And the key players, let's say, but the key negotiators in each of the bodies. Then my colleague Alejandro presented our view on the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal, so what the European Disability Forum thinks. Very succinctly, main strengths included being a binding law, so something that needs to be implemented throughout the European Union. You cannot opt out, and that it's based on a mutual recognition and covers indeed this perspective of all services, not pick and choose. It's also complementing national cards. Among the weaknesses, the main one was indeed the exclusion of social protection, or at least temporary access to it, and no link to mobility programs such as Erasmus. Some others were also the practical steps to raise awareness that were not clear, and the minor involvement of persons with disabilities in a formal basis. So this does not mean that we cannot advocate, but it means that we are not structurally consulted. It means that there is no requirement for policymakers to reach out to us. And then we finally look at some of our proposals to address these weaknesses. So this leads us to now. I see a lot of questions in the chat box, so we'll have around half an hour to answer, so we might not reach to everything. My colleague Marie was already answering a lot of questions that appear on the Q&A box. We will try to reach, I see that some people are asking questions on the chat. I would ask them to pass it to the question and answer box. So to start, I will take 2 questions from 2 different speakers that speaks about the digital part of the card. So I'll try to unite it. So one of them is how the use of the digital card will be guaranteed and how will the user be identified, which is complemented by another question, which is a question for our team, if the current concept is sufficiently future-proof with regards to digitalization, so if it will hold on in the future. With this question, so we'll start with these 2 questions. Alejandro, would you like to comment?
Sorry, Andrea, I got lost. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, sorry. So one of the questions are related to the digital version of the card. Mm-hmm. So is how it will be guaranteed. So how will the user be identified? Mm-hmm. And the second one is if the digitalization, the concept of digitalization is sufficiently future-proof.
Well, the directive does not go into details because these details will be laid down in those complementary acts that I mentioned before. They are called implementing and delegated acts that will be developed after the legislation is adopted. So the proposal for a directive does not specify or does not oblige member states to go for one way or the other. It just allows the possibility of having both the European Disability Card and the European Parking Card as digital cards as well. So many of you may already use the digital wallets on your smartphone, for example, for your digital credit cards or other types of cards. So the disability card could be also a digital card there in those digital wallets. And then when we ask, because we were thinking as well about this question, what about a digital parking card? Because obviously you need to display the parking card on your car for the police or the authority to check that you can park there. The Commission explained that there are some pilot projects and some ideas of integrating this parking card in kind of like in a digital element of our cars. Now cars, they have almost a computer inside them. So the parking card for persons with disabilities could be integrated into the kind of like a digital system, so that for the police to check, for example. So this is, I think, quite future proof, but we don't know exactly the details. And again, it will depend on what the national authorities will decide by the possibilities, but the possibilities are there.
Okay, thank you very much. So this was a question indeed on the content. So then I have in my view, excellent question as communication coordinator, which is indeed, how could we contribute at a personal identity level through suggestions? And is there any deadlines to contribute to these suggestions?
Well, you can always contribute by raising awareness about this proposal, and particularly if you want to get more active, I would say to distribute your opinion, your proposals or EDF proposals. You can obviously use to your ministry in charge of disability policies. Those are the ones discussing the legislation in the council. So any help with those will be much appreciated, because here in Brussels we have, let's say, a fairly good cooperation with MEPs in the European Parliament, but it's a little bit more tricky with the national government. So if you can help by reaching out to your national government, your national ministry in charge of disability, and send them our proposals for amendments, that would be very much appreciated. But we need to act fast, I must say, as well, because at the moment they all want to finish this file before the elections. So we are acting as quick as we can.
Thank you so much. Now, another question. So what happens if the Council or the Parliament does not approve the text of the directive or the law? Does the process start again, or it stops there?
It starts again. I mean, it's a complex system, but if one of the two co-legislators, so the Parliament or the Council, do not agree, it goes back to what is called a second reading, and that will delay very much the process, and it can be blocked, as it happened with other legislation. So let's hope that this does not reach that point. So we don't expect this to happen in the disability card, because this is, let's say, non-controversial proposal that everybody is welcoming. So we don't expect such a dramatic situation. Please cross fingers.
Yes, I think, yeah, to summarize, it needs to start again, but we think it's very, very low probability that it will actually happen with this legislation. Then I have a question on voluntary use. Is listed among positive elements of the proposal, yet our position paper expresses concerns that it should remain voluntary to have the card. Can you clarify?
Yes, yes. Maybe I did not explain myself clearly. What we are very strong about is the fact that for other rights that we achieved in other European regulation concerning, as I said, passengers' rights, for example, so your right to access assistance in an airport or in station, the European disability card should not be required as a proof of disability, because that's not included in the other regulations concerning passengers' rights. So the card should remain, the use of the card, the European disability card, should remain voluntary for you if you decide to use it when you travel abroad. So if you are visiting another EU country and you see that a museum or a cultural center or a cinema has a discount, or you can access a specific space for persons with disabilities, the European disability card can guarantee that that service provider will not discriminate you. But obviously it's up to you to use it or not. So you are not required to use it. I mean, you are not required to make use of the card, for sure. What we were concerned about in our proposal was that there is a specific article in which it allows member states to issue the European disability card automatically. So in our original proposal, we said that this should be upon request. So the user should be able to say, okay, I'm Spanish, but I'm going to travel to France. I want people not to judge if I have a disability or not. So I request the European disability card because I want to use it, and I request it. So upon request. But we also found that there are some countries, as is the case of Belgium, in which once you go through the disability assessment in the country, you receive automatically the European disability card. And in some countries as well, such as I believe is going to be the case in Greece, for example, there is the plan of having the European disability card on one side and the national disability card on the other side. So in that case, when you go through the disability assessment in Greece, if this is the case, please don't take this as a confirm. It's just a hypothetical example. If you go through the disability assessment in Greece and the result of the assessment is that you receive automatically the national card, but that national card includes on the other side the European accessibility card, then in a way is the issuing of the European disability card is kind of automatic, because it's as a result of the national disability assessment. So we need to bear these different scenarios into consideration. What we stress is the now when we talk with policymakers, after understanding this variety of circumstances in the full diversity of our continent, is that the use of the card when you travel abroad, the European disability card, should be voluntary, and the issuing at national level, if it is not in the cases that I just mentioned, it should be upon request. This would be basically the explanation. I hope is more or less clear. Maybe we did not word it as in the best way, but this is basically what we are explaining to policymakers.
Yes. Now, we did have several requests since we are talking about national disability assessment. So I will try to ask indeed the 3 questions in one, and you can maybe complement indeed your answer. So in relation to this, indeed, one of the questions is that there are different disability cards and different disability assessments. So the disability card could bring a situation where the card holders of this European card have more rights. What is our position on this issue? Related to this, what is our position or what is the position of the forum regarding the assessment procedure to acquire the status of disability and the fact that it differs drastically from country to country? And the third question, which is related to this, and just maybe to make it more concrete, if there will be a developed common disability classification system, so I imagine at EU level, develop in relation to this proposal, I imagine.
Okay, so concerning the first question, which is actually something a question that we received quite often, it's true that the European disability card may create what some people called reverse discrimination. So like let's say a European disability card holder traveling to a member state in which there is a preferential treatment to local with disabilities may get more rights than locals with disabilities. That is a situation that in certain circumstances it may happen. But having said that, those situations are I would say the fewest, and I mean, we cannot think of a way to solve this situation, and the only way to solve it, which actually relates to the other two questions, would entail a huge amount of a huge risk for the disability movement in every country, and so this kind of reverse discrimination or differences in rights when moving across Europe, it happens in different fields as well, not only on disability. But again, it will be cases. I mean, you need to come up with a specific example in a specific situation that is very concrete to actually make a case for being against the. It does not make a case to be against the European Disability Card as an enabler or supporting free movement. The other two questions relate with something that is being brought up in many times concerning the disability card, which is the differences in how countries are assessing and certifying and classifying disability. We all know that unfortunately most, if not all, countries have still a medical approach when it comes to assessing the disability and classifying it, or putting labels and degrees and so forth. And that's something that from the disability movement, and we know that our members at national level are advocating to change, to be more in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So when we are faced with the question like, why don't we harmonize disability or harmonize disability assessment at European level, because we believe that our country is not doing this right, we need to remember that the other countries are not doing it right either. And it is a tremendous risk to harmonize disability assessment at European level, because then, as it has happened in other policy fields, countries, they tend to go for the minimum common denominator, and therefore something that we hope for an improvement may turn out in something that actually worsen the situation in many countries in Europe. So we are glad that the disability card does not go into this, which, by the way, is a very, very, very national competence. So the EU cannot go into harmonizing such a thing. So I believe in this regard, we need to keep pushing for changes and improvements at national level. From the European level, unfortunately, we have the constraints that we have because the EU cannot regulate absolutely everything. So within these kind of constraints, we are getting progress through other means, such as, for example, the European Disability Card.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. So now I have a question more about the parking card and actually reserved parking spaces. So will the member states police or whoever is in charge of controlling make sure that the user using a reserved parking lot can use as the European parking card? And if there is a fine at stake, do we have information on how it will be dealt with?
Sorry, Andre, can you repeat? I didn't understand.
Sorry, in terms of the illegal occupancy of reserved parking spaces, the question is how will police fiscalize, or will they make sure that they have a European parking card, persons parking, and if they by mistake give them a fine, how can it be fought against?
Yeah, the directive includes certain elements or a requirement to fight against fraud, forgery, and so forth, and in a way, the fact that this directive is harmonizing, and this is harmonizing. So this is bringing, withdrawing the different national parking cards and bringing a common card for all EU countries. This is already helpful for the police at national level, at local level, to verify if a card is actually real or not, because you may come with a fake parking card from another EU country, and the police doesn't necessarily need to know if that is a real card or not. So having a common format, let's say, will be very useful for the police, and also the fact that in the future we even may have this kind of digital European parking cards that can also be useful. But all those questions need to be resolved at national level as well. The directive does not go into this. It just requires measures to avoid this, and the fact that we are having a common card will facilitate it.
Thank you. I now have maybe 3 questions that I will put in one, as they relate to our expectations and the services that are included in the card. So one is we expect free of charge access to local transport services and to parking to be part of the approach of the card. So this would be one, transport services and parking. The second is regarding personal assistance, if this includes dogs that are accompanying persons in a wheelchair. And the third one is about recognition of the card by places of study, and if there is a chance that this is included in the text adopted by the MEPs or the council, or in the final text indeed.
Okay, let's see if I got it all. So concerning the first question, unfortunately not. I mean, this is it was a question about whether with the card you would get free transport or free parking. No, this will depend if your country or your community or your city provides for free transport and free community. If your country gives the possibility for traveling for free in the public transport, then a European disability card holder will be able to benefit if they travel to this specific city, or if in your city reserved parking for persons with disabilities is for free. A European citizen with the European parking card will be able to park for free. So this is about, it does not create, the directive does not create preferential treatment or a special condition. It ensured that when this preferential treatment and these special conditions exist, a European with disability will be treated equally as a local with disability. This is all about it. The second question about personal assistants and assistant dogs, yes, they are. I believe that they are mentioned in the legislation in a recital, if I'm not mistaken, but I cannot tell you for sure. But the proposal does recognize the role of personal assistance as well. And the last question, what was the last question, Andre?
On places of study making it into the final text, them recognizing the European Disability Card.
Places of study.
Yes, universities,
yeah.
Education, high school. So
but
also
what is the question?
If we would include if we think it's likely that in the final text, the places of study will be included. So the link with mobility programs, I imagine.
Yes, well, we hope so. So the idea is that if a person moves for a short stay, to an education center, and that center provides certain preferential treatment or special conditions for persons with disabilities. So, for example, the access to assistive technologies in the library of the university, a European disability card holder will be able to access those. Our advocacy is aiming also at trying to get that those students that will go to a university for more than 3 months, so to move for a 6 months period or even a year because of Erasmus or otherwise, or because they just enroll in another university, they will be covered by the social protection system as well. So not only the university, because sometimes the university is not the one providing the support to the students. Sometimes is the public authorities providing. So we want to ensure that is part of the final text, but we will see.
Okay, thank you, Alejandro. Now I'm going to give the floor to Francisco Trigueros from EDBU for him to ask a question, as the chat is not accessible. So Francisco, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. I'm representing EDBU, and I would like to make 2 comments or suggestions. When it comes to the parking card, sometimes it tends to be a problem, the fact that we only have one card that we leave in the car, and then we might not be able to identify ourselves as the owner of that car if we are stopped by authorities or someone. So it would be very useful to have 2 cards for the parking so that we can actually say, this is my car and this is my name under the car. And then secondly, my second suggestion is when it comes to the information, that it's very different, and we have different legislation and different rules in every city, in every country. So for example, for parking, I would appreciate to have an app that could inform me about the concrete rules in each city or in each region or country, so that I would feel more safe and secure on whether something is feasible or not. So apps are just easier to access than websites, and that would definitely be one of a very useful tool for many people. So thank you very much for this webinar, and I wish you all the best with this fight.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. I think we'll take into account EDBU's suggestion. Okay.
Thank you, Francisco. Just to reply to the questions, Andre, concerning the parking card, it is envisaged in the in the annex of the legislation, if you look at it, you will see what information the future European parking card will include. So you will see that the police will be able to check who is the car holder fairly easily. And concerning your second question, your second suggestion, it is true that maybe an app could be useful, but first, the very first step, and what we are calling for in our advocacy, is to have that information in a database, because we know that there are many rules and they differ from city to city. So having them all in a database, let's say, or in a portal, some sort of way to gathering all this information, then from that portal or that database, people can create, I'm sure there will be people creating apps, or it will be an easy access for persons with disabilities. But first is to get the information, and there are many different rules. So that's the most important part. And then the way in which users will access that information will be an easy solution. But the difficult part is to get all that data.
Thank you, Alejandro. I think we'll end with the, I still have three, I think we can answer 2 questions. So the first one is, why did it take 15 years for the EU disability card legislation to get where it is today? And what kind of barriers are there? So that would be the first question, and then the other questions are related with non-EU cooperation. But I'll ask maybe after.
Okay, it's an excellent question. Why it took so long? Well, the EU does take a lot of time to produce legislation. I mean, we need to understand that the constraints of our union and the fact that member states need to agree and so forth. So it is in itself quite an ambitious project. It's a political project which require many checks and balances, and obviously the political will of the EU policymakers make a difference. So the fact that the disability movement, we've been so strong and so tirelessly trying to get this in a piece of legislation, has proven that all the efforts were worth it, and even if they took long, the reality is that finally the European Commission has taken our demands into consideration, and even within their constraints, they have found a way to put this forward in a piece of legislation. Because let's remember that when the disability strategy was published, we didn't know that we saw that the disability card was supposed to be presented in 2023, but we didn't know that it was going to be in the form of a directive. This was a positive surprise that we learned afterwards. At first, we thought, okay, this disability strategy does not include any legislation, and we were happily surprised with this proposal for a directive. So all in all, things are moving. It takes time, but we need to keep pushing, which is what we do.
Thank you, Alejandro. So we have 2 minutes until the end. So I'm making a final question that will need to be answered quite fast. That is related with non-EU nationals. So one is if there is a plan for cooperation with non-EU countries, for example, Taiwan. And the second is, how can we ensure that non-European Union travelers are not treated worse than today after the European Disability Card's implementation?
I mean, the European Disability Card can only be issued or will only be issued to European citizens or third country residents, legally residents in the EU. So if you are an American who lives in France you are American with a disability living in France, and you've been certified by French authorities, you can get your European Disability Card. Non-Europeans visiting the EU, it will really depend, as it has happened until now for all of us, it will really depend on the will of the service provider. So if you come across a friendly service provider that believes that you have a disability and doesn't want to judge, and they allow you to go into the preferential treatment that locals with disabilities get, that's how it should be. But we know from our life experiences that sometimes you run into awful people, which already also exist, and sometimes they may say, okay, sorry, if you don't have the European disability card, I will not consider that you have a disability. That's the sad situation that sometimes happen, but is raising awareness about the rights of persons with disabilities and against discrimination to persons with disability does not concern countries or borders or any of these aspects. So this is just an instrument that we are putting forward to keep on advancing and recognizing the rights of persons with disabilities, but goes without saying that those situations for non-EU citizens should also be prevented as well. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. We don't have time for any more questions, unfortunately, but we will indeed, as an answer to a question, maybe we will indeed try to provide the questions and answers, at least that we don't answer by email, and we'll add it on our documents after the meeting. We'll just have to be a bit patient, as it will take indeed a while. So thank you very much. So we are closing the meeting, but before we close, I want to thank our captioner Vele and our international sign interpreters, Natasha and Razak, for the help and for making this meeting accessible. I really want to thank our colleague Raquel, who organized all the logistics for this. So really thank you, Raquel. Your help is very precious. We will not have this meeting without you. And finally, we would like to thank the intervenants in this meeting. So MEP Nicole Sonova by video message, our Deputy Director Alejandro, and also Marie Denninghaus, which answered the questions also on the chat. And finally, I would like to thank all of you for attending and listening to us during 1 hour and a half. And we'll follow up with more with the documents. I will just like to again ask you to make sure that after this meeting, you can take 5 minutes to answer the post-event survey. We will have other meetings like this, and it is always helpful to have feedback to improve. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you join us on this journey to make the European Disability Card a reality, and a card that really helps persons with disabilities all throughout the Union. Thank you so much.